Yoga Connection with Zorananda is a deep dive into the world of yoga, exploring the rich history of tradition, methodology, and practices both ancient and modern. Follow along as yoga is explored through solo episodes to guest interviews to understand its vast reach around the world. Hello and welcome to the Yoga Connection. My name is Zorananda, and today we dive into the traditional practices of yoga, and we're starting with Hatha Yoga. So in my previous episode, I went into just a kind of introduction on what all the yogas we're going to be looking at over the next several weeks. Essentially, we have 9 different types of yoga, and today we are starting with Hatha Yoga. And I want to start with this one because I think it's the most prominent, and it's a good way to get into the history of yoga, because it's really what kind of starts it all. And I'm going to go through kind of as much as I understand and much as I know the beginning of it up until the modern. So I don't think I'm going to be able to do that all in one hour podcast. So this one will probably be broken down into 1 to 2 to 3 episodes. And I think that's important because there's so much information, and the primary book that I'm going to be sourcing my information from is the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which to me is like the Bible of Hatha Yoga, right? So it has everything that you need to know about the practice and how to really move forward in your pursuit in understanding yoga, Hatha Yoga, and what enlightenment means, and really the preparation needed for deeper truths and illuminations to occur in your life. And so I'm going to be reading from the book itself. I think it's really well written. And especially just right at the introduction, there's several sections that explain what Hatha Yoga is, explain some of the history. So I'm going to go into that, and then I'm going to kind of go into what I understand is the history and some of the stories and what you can do to start to understand Hatha Yoga now and what it is and really what it's not. So right at the beginning of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, on page 1, there's a section called Swamiji on Hatha Yoga. And again, I'm going to read through this and then have some commentary and some thoughts on what I'm reading and what I'm sharing. And disclaimer, this is going to be nerdy. Like, this is the epitome of getting into really the thick of it. And I don't want to gloss over anything. I really want to get into the proper terminology and where this information is coming from. And this book is just perfect as a tool and as a source for this. So on the very first page, on page 1 in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, titled Swamiji on Hatha Yoga, it states, "In yogic literature, we have a number of reliable texts on Hatha Yoga. The Hatha Yoga Pradipika by Yogi Swatma Rama is a very well-known one. Another by Yogi Goraknath is known as the Goraksha Samhita. And Goraknath is supposed to be one of the very first yogis in history. He was a direct disciple of Shiva himself. A third text is Geranda Samhita by the great sage Gerand. So I've gone through this text a little bit in my Pranayama videos. So especially if you go to the Samana Vayu, and I think, which other one did I do? So if you go to my Pranayama videos or podcasts, I use the Geranda Samhita as like an example as well. So Continuing on, besides these three, there is a fourth major text known as Hatha Navali, which was written later by, and this is a mouthful of a name, Sri Nivasabhata Mahayogindra. All these texts are considered to have been written between the 6th and 15th centuries AD. There are also minor references to Hatha Yoga in the ancient Upanishads and Puranas. The Upanishads date back earlier than the Buddhist period, which was around the 6th century BC. The references made in the Upanishads indicate that the science of Hatha Yoga was known well before this period. There is another very important text known as Srimad Bhagavatam, the story of Krishna. In that voluminous book, there are references to Hatha Yoga in general chapters. So this is spanning like 2,000 years. The Hatha Yoga practice is quite old and expected to be older. That even though the written documentation of it goes back to the 6th to 15th century, that there is also a like verbal lineage, that it's only an oral lineage before that, and that it can be even dated back 5,000 years ago. So another 3,000 years of oral tradition of carrying forward this kind of knowledge and wisdom. So again, continuing on, this gives us a glimpse of the historical aspect of Hatha Yoga. For centuries, these books have guided spiritual aspirants. Many sects were also formed in India, Nepal, and Tibet on the basis of Hatha Yoga. What is the subject matter of these books? Is it just to maintain a youthful body or to obtain psychic powers, called siddhis? Or is it to develop the capacity to awaken the potential energy, quote, kundalini, and attain supra-consciousness, samadhi? As we analyze these texts carefully, the purpose becomes very clear. In ancient times, Hatha Yoga was practiced for many years as a preparation for higher states of consciousness. Today, however, the real purpose of this great science has been forgotten altogether. The Hatha Yoga practices, which were designed by the rishis and sages of old for the evolution of mankind, are now being understood and utilized in a very limited sense. Often we hear people say, quote, "Oh, I don't practice meditation, I only practice physical yoga, Hatha Yoga." Now the time has come to correct this point. Hatha Yoga is a very important science for humanity today. So this book, at least this version, was put together by Swami Muktibodhananda Saraswati sometime in the 70s, I believe. And this is a kind of compilation of different versions of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. But even at her time, in the 70s, which was like 50 years ago, the emergence of Hatha Yoga into a more like generalized practice was present. And if you look at it now, what we know of as Hatha Yoga is typically just a name or a title on a yoga studio schedule, right? So I think it's important that the term Hatha Yoga is really fully understood in its original sense, and which is why I'm doing what I'm doing, so that you as a listener, you as a practitioner, can start to form an understanding that has much more depth, much more history, and is much richer in essence than something that you'll just see on a schedule or on an Instagram reel or whatever, right? That the practice itself is encoded with so much energy and so much information and wisdom that it goes back thousands of years. And that can be hard to really grasp, right? How do we grasp thousands of years of cultivation of energy and practice, right? So it is much easier just to kind of see it as a term, but as you've just heard in just the first page of the intro, that there is a rich history, and it's coming out of these fairly prolific books by authors that really found the like deeper importance within themselves to display what Hatha Yoga is and what yoga is amidst so much scrutiny, right? Because they're going against a new form of religious practice through Buddhism, right? And there's even a section here that kind of goes into how that affected the view of Hatha Yoga. So continuing on, there's a section called The Culling of Hatha Yoga, where it's stated, by the 6th century AD, a lot of spiritual evolution had already taken place in India over many centuries. 2 great men were born in India in the 6th century BC. One is known internationally as Buddha and the other as Mahavir, the founder of the Jain sect, a tradition in Indian culture. Both of them performed severe austerities both also preached non-violence, ahimsa. Finally, Buddha formulated his teachings, which are known as the Four Noble Truths. 2 of Buddha's systems became widely known all over the world. One is known as Vipassana, and the other is Anapanasati, contemplation. For this, Buddha laid a basic foundation called the Eightfold Path, which was a system of ethics more or less like the Yama and Niyamas of Raja Yoga, or Ashtanga Yoga. As a result of Buddha's popularity, meditation became the main form of spiritual practice on the entire subcontinent. However, the preparatory practices were ignored. Ethics and morality were very much overemphasized. It was at this time that the thinkers of India began to reassess Buddha's system. Indians believe that meditation is the highest path, but they disagree on one point, that one can start meditation immediately. Instead, they believe one has to prepare oneself. And so that's the important thing, right? That when it comes to anything that we do, the desire for mastery or the desire for a particular depth cannot be approached until there's a certain level of preparation, right? And we can think of that with anything. We can think of that with music. If I'm going to be on stage and I'm going to be rocking out to a full house and a full crowd, if I'm not fully prepared, knowing my set list, knowing all my songs, knowing all my parts, knowing the choreography of how my band and I are going to play, there's no way for me to actually successfully perform without the preparation. And so it's really emphasized here as well, too, that in order to go into deeper states of meditation, there has to be a preparation. It's not so simple just to sit and wait, because your body is not going to enjoy seated for a long period of time. And so the Hatha Yoga practice is the means to allow your body to rest and be still in a seated position without being perturbed in any way. So it goes on, 500 years after Buddha and 100 years before Christ, in India, at Nalanda in Bihar, a great university was established in the Buddhist tradition, devoted to the Hinayana system. Hinayana means the narrow path, i.e. the orthodox Buddhist system. Many thousands of students from all over the known world came to study religion here. This is before Christ. And so it's wild to me to think about how all this comes about. And when I think about us now in this world, in this modern age, and what we have access to, all the comforts, all the technology, just where we are in the Western world, it's really easy to look back at that time and think of how primitive people are. But the consideration of deeper spirituality has always been around on our planet. And when I think about going back in time to India and this area and thinking about these things, it could possibly be that there was a different kind of advancement, that just because they didn't have the kind of technology that we have right now, that the advancement in thinking and the advancement of understanding consciousness, I think, was at a different level than even now. And it's pretty significant to consider a level of humility that you should really have in understanding where these kind of leaders in consciousness were at that time, right? So it goes on to say, however, there was another group among the Buddhists who did not agree with the orthodox interpretation of the teachings. They thought that it was not what Buddha himself had preached, so they established another university called Vikramshila, 8 miles east of Mungar in Bihar, which became the teaching center of the Mahayana tradition. Mahayana means the Great Path. They were not orthodox Buddhists, but open-minded liberal Buddhists. In that Mahayana tradition, they also began to include Tantra. However, this was not something Buddha had directly preached about, so orthodox Buddhists did not believe in it. From Vikramshila, a sect arose known as Sahajayana. I said that so wrong. Sahajayana, there we go. The spontaneous way, and Vajrayana, which includes the sexual matters between a man and a woman. So the practice of the tantric sects were very much misinterpreted by orthodox people. So we're kind of getting into another form of yoga, the tantra side, which I'm going to get into much, much later. But you can see how they're all kind of forming around the same time, or they have already been present, right? So it goes on to say, after about 500 years or so, right, just 500 years, no biggie, the popularity influence of Buddhism declined, and so did these tantric sects and their practices. Then in the 4th, 5th, and 6th centuries AD, after the period of Buddhist decadence in India, some great yogis took the science and set out of... sorry, I'm reading this weird. Okay, Then in the 4th, 5th, and 6th centuries AD, after the period of Buddhist decadence in India, some great yogis took the science and set out to purify the tantric system. Matsyendranath, Goraknath, and a few other yogis in the tradition found that this important science was being ignored by serious-minded people and being wrongly taught by others. So they separated the Hatha Yoga and the Raja Yoga practices of Tantra from the rest and left out the rituals of Tantra altogether, not even mentioning them. And that's why in the Hatha Yoga practice, you don't see really ritual, right? It's very streamlined in you being by yourself. It's not really meant to include other people. Even though, you know, in our modern era, a Hatha Yoga class is a group class and it only takes an hour and then you do your poses and you get out. But in this case, the Hatha Yoga practice was really meant for you as an individual in your pursuit for enlightenment. So in this case, they were seeing that Tantra was kind of an impediment, and especially if you are practicing a kind of austerity where you want to internalize the processes that are happening within you, that it's more so about what's happening in your body rather than the rituals that are kind of outside of yourself, that you're invoking something and then you're using pleasure and sex and to amplify the sensitivity to that, where in the Hatha Yoga practice, the amplification of the sensitivity is all internalized within you. So it continues on. When they culled the practices, they picked up the useful, practical, noble practices of yoga from the tantric system. At the same time, it became necessary for them to classify some of the unclassified instructors in Tantra. Also, Buddha was a great personality. His teachings later remained merely what we call psychological experiences. Therefore, it became necessary to reintroduce a proper system of meditation. That is how the system of Hatha Yoga was established. It was at this time that Matsyendranath founded the Naut cult, which believed that before taking to the practice of meditation, you must purify the body and its elements. This is the theme of Hatha Yoga. And Matsyendranath is another original yogi. He's said to be the first Hatha yogi out of Adinath or Shiva, Adinath being the first yogi, right? I'm going to go into a story about all that right away. So that's really interesting because the Naut yoga lineage is said to be one of the oldest, right? That this could even stem back before that and through Adinath. There's an amazing book, and I talked about it in one of my last videos, Babaji, The Lightning Standing Still by Yogi Raj Satguru Nath. where he goes into the first kind of sages that came out of Adinath, and they're considered or they're called avatars and avadhuts. So out of Babaji, who is, you know, purported to be Shiva himself, that Shiva ordained these beings who are avatars, who are essentially aspects of himself that manifest into the world, because Shiva itself is this like cosmic entity, and it is ever present in all that there is. And so Shiva, wanting a representation of himself, created these avatars. And then from the avatars, you have the avadhuts, who are the kind of disciples of the avatars themselves. And then Matsyendranath and Gorakshanath are a part of, I believe, these like avatars, who are the kind of like the first founders of Hatha Yoga, who then went on to, you know, create their own grouping of disciples. But just a bit of a side note. Again, like I said, this is going to be a fucking nerdy episode going into a whole bunch of stuff, right? And so the Nath yoga lineage, being one of the oldest, is to me the kind of gatekeeper to all of this. And an interesting fact about my own lineage into this yoga is that I am connected to the Nath yoga lineage through my teacher, Yogrishi Vishvaketu, because his teacher was Baba Premnath. So his teacher and guru was a part of the Nath yoga lineage. So he had two teachers. He had Baba Premnath and Yoginath. Yoginath was this man that he learned from, and he only spent a small amount of time. I think he spent like maybe just like a few weeks with him, but got major downloads. And essentially Vishwaji was initiated into the Nath yoga lineage. He doesn't really outright say that, but I have my suspicion that through Baba Premnath, he was initiated as a Nath yogi, given the name Vishvaketu, and then started the Akhanda Yoga Institute, and is now like a world renowned international yoga teacher and figure. So to me, because Akhanda Yoga is rooted in the Nath Yoga lineage, and it's and Vishwaji is a Nath yogi, that being initiated by Vishwaji gets you initiated into the Nath yoga lineage. And he doesn't outright say this. This is kind of my own speculation, my own understanding. I see it as that. It makes sense to me that, say, if like you are, say you play piano and your teacher was taught by another teacher who's taught by another teacher who's taught by another teacher who's taught by Franz Liszt, you know, that there are these like generational teachings that you would be like a Franz Liszt generational student, right? So I see the same thing, that out of this, I'm a generational Nath yoga lineage student. And that would go with anybody who does the Akhanda Yoga teacher trainings, right? When you're given a name by Vishwaji, that is the initiation. And so the name that he gave me is Divakaranand, which is super interesting. You know, there's a whole synchronicity in that, where, you know, my name Zoran in Serbian means sunrise, and I had a fairly profound experience in 2014 being initiated into the Ananda name, to add Ananda to my name, turning into Zorananda, which means bliss of the sunrise. And then 2 years later, doing my 300-hour teacher training and Vishruji giving me Devakaranand, which means bliss of the sun, and he had no idea. I remember seeing that and reading the card and reading bliss of the sun and laughing and looking at him and being like, do you know what my actual name means? And he was like, no. And I'm like, yeah, my given name Zoran means sunrise, and Zorananda means bliss of the sunrise. And we just like laughed together. I'm like, did you know? And he was like, no, of course. How would I know that? So, now you know. And let's see here. So the Hatha Yoga practice dates back pretty far, maybe even farther, 6th to 15th century BC. And so well over 2,000 years, approaching the 3,000 year mark. So I'm going to read a little bit more. There's a couple more sections that I'd like to get into, and then I'll kind of just ramble on what I know of the Hatha Yoga practice and some of the history. And that should take us to about the one hour mark, and I can kind of start formulating what the next episodes will look like. But there's a section here called The Science of Purification, where it states, of the many authorities on Hatha Yoga, one outstanding personality is Swatmarama, who compiled the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. It can also be translated as light on Hatha Yoga. However, the term Pradipika actually means self-illuminating, or that which illuminates. It is a text which illuminates a multitude of physical, mental, and spiritual problems for aspirants. Gorakhnath, the chief disciple of Matsyendranath, had earlier written books, poems, and prose on the Hatha Yoga system in the local dialect, but Swatmarama compiled the entire wisdom of Hatha Yoga in Sanskrit. In common with the other texts, he has expounded techniques such as asana, pranayama, and shatkarma. So shatkarma means the 6 actions. Satkarma are like cleansing techniques. It's like the 6 actions that help you clean out your body. The beauty of Hatha Yoga Pradipika is that it solves a very great problem faced by every aspirant. Swatmarama has completely eliminated the yama moral codes and niyama self-restraints, which are the starting points in the Buddhist and Jain systems, as well as in Patanjali's Raja Yoga, or Ashtanga Yoga. Patanjali was a contemporary of Buddha, and his system of yoga was influenced by the Buddhist philosophy of yama and niyama. In the Yoga Sutras, he divided Raja Yoga into 8 steps. Yama and niyama are the first 2, followed by asana and pranayama. Then come pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, which are the final 4. Patanjali's contention is that you have to first perfect yama and niyama, otherwise asana and pranayama may fail to give desirable results. So that is interesting. And my thought on that is because of a kind of fine-tunement of your character, right? So when I just did a whole series on Ashtanga Yoga, which is interesting that they call it Raja Yoga in this book, but that there is a kind of character development that is coming out of the practice of the yamas and niyamas. So when it comes to non-harm, non-theft, truthfulness, cleanliness, self-study, whatever it is out of the 10 yamas and niyamas, that the attunement that is happening through the asana practice and pranayama and pratyahara practice enables an empowerment. And so if you are empowering yourself because your body is becoming really fit and really flexible, and you can endure a lot. And when you come to a point of being able to endure the environment and endure people, that you can actually exercise a kind of power over your environment because you're not perturbed by anything. You're not reactive to anything. You're not reactive to what people say, what people do. It doesn't matter. You have this empowerment over your environment. So if you don't have these moral codes in place, if you don't know to think about not being harmful and being truthful, that you can be empowering a quality within yourself that wants to take advantage. And it continues to say, so what are yama and niyama? Self-control, rules of conduct and observances, truth, non-violence, celibacy, non-stealing, and aggrandizement, external internal purity, and contentment are some of the regulations. However, the authors of the text of Hatha Yoga, such as Swatmarama, were very much aware of the practical difficulties every person faced in relation to yama and niyama. Moreover, yama and niyama have more to do with religion than with a person's spiritual life. Experience has taught us that in order to practice yama and niyama, discipline and self-control, a certain quality of mind is needed. Often we observe that when we try to practice self-control and discipline, we create more mental problems in our mind and personality. If we were to take the statistics of patients in mental hospitals, we would find that most of them are religious because of self-discipline and self-control split the personality. Therefore, before you try to practice self-discipline and self-control, you must also prepare yourself. If harmony is not created in the personality, then self-control and self-discipline will create more conflict rather than peace of mind. Therefore, the principle of antithesis should not be taught to everybody. It has always been expounded as a philosophical or religious principle, but from the spiritual standpoint, it has mercilessly failed to assist man when confronted with the dilemma of his own evolution. And so that's to say that out of the two, upholding a moral code and having like a Hatha Yoga practice, that they really aren't to be separated. So if you're only going to do the yamas and niyamas, that the mental load might be too much for you, because there is a kind of capacity that you're going to need to withstand the contradictions that are going to take place. For example, non-harm. Do you eat meat or not? So if you're going to uphold non-harm and you're going to be really steadfast on it, then technically you should be a vegan, because going to the grocery store and buying a pound of ground beef, buying a steak, buying chicken, whatever, you're contributing to harm by buying into a system that systematically kills animals, right? And so if you're looking at all the yamas and niyamas and you're having this kind of split within your personality of what is right or wrong and how you should go about doing it, the Hatha Yoga practice and your ability to endure the give and take of the energetic system, that you're not going to have that split occur, that you're working hand in hand with these systems, that you can have a capacity for the kind of energy that it takes to withstand the mental load of those contradictions. And this shows up, I think, generally in all of our lives when it comes to our personal endeavors, when it comes to our career, when it comes to our passions, especially when it comes to like work and living and making sure you have money to pay things, but also having the desire and passion to do a hobby and turn your hobby into something that is fruitful, right? And then you have this back and forth of, well, I need to work 8 hours a day to get all the money I need to pay my bills and feed my family, but I'm sacrificing the time that would go towards my passion, if it's music, if it's art, whatever it is. And so to utilize a practice to find a balance between that, I think is what they're saying here, that the moral code itself isn't going to help. So say if you're conflicted because you need to make a certain amount of money by the end of the month and your job kind of doesn't do it, and you are finding reasons to get out of work to work on your passion, but that means you're not making enough money, right? So say if you have to work 30 days in a month, say, minus the weekend. So say if you have to work 24 days in a month and you're taking 5 days extra off a month to work on a passion that you're not getting paid for, those 5 days amount to income that you just don't get. And so in the moral code, say in the non-harm, you start to think about yourself, well, I'm starting to harm myself because I should be working on those days, but I don't want to work on those days because I want to work on this other thing. What do you do? Right? So the mental load of that starts to weigh down and starts to stress you out. And what they're saying here is that the Hatha Yoga practice is actually going to train yourself to be able to withstand the mental load, to come to a conclusion that the moral guide isn't going to really fulfill for yourself by itself. And so the last section that I'm going to read here, let's see, I think there was a couple. Okay, yeah, there's a couple that I want to read. It's just one here and one at the end. So, section called Aim of Hatha Yoga. In order to purify the mind, it is necessary for the body as a whole to undergo a process of absolute purification. Hatha Yoga is also known as the science of purification, not just one type of purification, but 6 types. The body has to be cleaned in 6 different ways for 6 different impurities. When you clear the body of these impurities, the nadis function as the energy blocks are released. So the nadis are these like energetic lines, energetic system. The energies move like wave frequencies throughout the channels within the physical structure, moving right up to the brain. Therefore, we consider Hatha Yoga as the preliminary practice of Tantra, Raja Yoga, Kundalini Yoga, and Kriya Yoga, which I'm all going to go into in later episodes. When the rishis discovered the science of Hatha Yoga, they did not have yoga therapy in mind. Although yoga has proved to be very effective in the treatment of many impossible and incurable diseases, the therapeutic effect of yoga is only a byproduct and incidental. The main objective of Hatha Yoga is to create an absolute balance of the interacting activities and processes of the physical body, mind, and energy. When this balance is created, the impulses generated give a call of awakening to the central force, the Sushumna Nadi, which is responsible for the evolution of human consciousness. If Hatha Yoga is not used for this purpose, its true objective is lost. So that's an interesting statement. I'm going to read that again. When this balance is created, the impulses generated give a call of awakening to the central force, which is responsible for the evolution of human consciousness. So, and I think that's why they're saying that the moral codes by themselves aren't going to alleviate the pressures of life, right? It's actually going to possibly cause confusion because of the kind of mental load that it's going to take. And where there are impurities in the body that are going to twist and contort the information and contort the understanding that is coming from the morals and ethics, where the Hatha Yoga practice on all of its levels is going to help purify the body and the mind and the energetic system, so that when you are applying the yamas and niyamas and the moral codes, that it's coming through a clear vessel. And so that the realization of the truth of them is much more profound than if you have a body that's full of impurities and you're trying to make a moral judgment that is going to be muddied by your own ego or your own imperfections, right? So when it comes to ahimsa, non-harm, that you can be very clear on your stance of what it means to not have harm and to not participate in harm, and not be fooled by any contradictions, right? So for me, I'm a yogi. I do everything in my life to be fairly clean and pure, and I eat meat. Is that a contradiction? Quite possibly. Is that confusing me? No, because in my practice and in what I do, what I consume can fuel the life that I live, and I don't have to be perturbed. I don't have to then consider what vegans say and vegetarians say and the vitriol that they're going to blast onto me, and it's not going to affect me, because the type of presence that I have through the practice that I do, how I uphold the moral and ethic codes, that it protects me from the kind of assault that's going to occur from anybody that's going to say anything, right? And I think that's like the true essence of a yogi, that it's not someone that's going to follow exactly what you think a yogi should follow. It's that they're really true and strong in the presence of who they are, and that presence is naturally loving and caring. And it's caring in two ways, that it's caring for myself and what my body needs, and it's caring for those immediately in my environment. And so that when I show up, I can be a loving and peaceful person, and I have a presence, and the people around me are going to notice that, whether it's like fully conscious or not, that there is going to be an effect in how I show up in my environment. And there is a cleanliness to it, even though I'm technically going against some of the tenets of what some people are going to think that ahimsa is, right? And that could all seem like an excuse, but it's what is happening and what I know in my life, at least, right? So the last section here, the real purpose of Hatha Yoga. In the last 40 years, Hatha Yoga has been accepted as a therapeutic science all over the world, and many scientific studies have been conducted in this field. Today, we teach yoga to people because it is very necessary. Man has become sick, and medical science is not able to meet the challenge. Hatha Yoga, however, has been helping everybody. Therefore, we do not want to discourage this aspect, but at the same time, we should not forget what Hatha Yoga really stands for. I'm just going to say that's quite biased. Hatha Yoga has been helping everybody. Of course, you're going to say that when you're, writing a book and compiling it about Hatha Yoga, that you're going to have some bias and say, oh yeah, Hatha Yoga is helping everybody. Not a single person has ever gotten injured. Not a single person has ever gotten manipulated by a teacher. It's helping everybody. But out of the sake of this episode, I'm going to say, yeah, sure, Hatha Yoga helps everybody. So continuing on, behind every sick man, there is a spiritual man. Behind a diabetic, there is a yogi. Behind a man suffering from depression, there is an aspirant. When a patient comes for help, teach him yoga and make him better. Treat his sickness, but do not stop there. Take him further into the spiritual domain of life. This is the mistake that most yoga teachers make in the West. They just take a patient with arthritis, rheumatism, or insomnia, teach him a few exercises, and that is it. Hatha Yoga has not been used to treat the total personality. This is why teachers are not able to raise the level of their pupils. Just to improve the physical health is not enough. The mental health must also improve. The nature must change, the personality must change, the psychological and the psychic framework also has to change. You should not merely feel freedom from disease, but freedom from bondage and from the vagaries of the mind. Now, the time has come when teachers in every part of the world must understand and transmit the true spirit of Hatha Yoga. So I think that's a great way to introduce Hatha Yoga. And to get a good sense of a little bit of the historical context and kind of where we're going in terms of yoga practices and what to look for and maybe what to avoid. And it is a progression towards self-fulfillment and self-exploration that almost inevitably with anything, you're going to start in a selfish way, right? You're going to get into something because of what you want out of it. And with yoga, what I find is that it's kind of like a hook and bait. It's almost like a carrot being dangled from a string, and you're following this carrot because you think the prize is the carrot. And then suddenly when you get to a destination, the carrot is pulled away from you, and what you see in front of you is so much more than what that little carrot could have ever provided for you. And so I think the yoga practice is in this vein as well. And the interesting thing that I see in people who join yoga cults, who then end up leaving, is that they continue doing yoga. That even though they were in a cult and their leader had either abused them or abused other followers, and that they were subject to some trauma, that coming out of it, they see yoga in a new light. They see yoga differently. And it's the same thing where a carrot was dangled in front of them, promising them something. And when it was revealed to them that that was not what they were going to be given, they can then go and see that their experience of yoga for themselves can completely transform. And I'm not suggesting you to join a cult to then go through that to understand what yoga is. That is not my point. My point is through austerity, you can have an experience with yoga that is deeply personal to you, that unveils something about the nature of who you are in a grander way than the attached way that you've had in the introduction to it. And that's why I'm very anti-cult, because I think people get attracted to cults for a particular reason. If it's the person, if it's the way that the information is packaged, and so they get lured in, and this carrot that's dangled is this like golden carrot, and they're like, oh my god, this is all the stuff that I'm gonna get. And for them, synchronistically, it had to take a pretty severe experience to then open themselves up to what it is. And so for me, I'm on the side of avoid all that and do it for yourself, and do some research and look things up. Look up a lot of different schools and find the schools that say, hey, you can do these teachings on your own time. You can receive guidance from this teacher in the comfort of your home. Anybody that says that you need to leave your life and go live on a compound somewhere, immediate red flag. I don't care who you are, and there is a person in Edmonton where I'm from that has done that. And John DeRitter effectively got kicked out of Edmonton because of the controversy around him, right? Like, he had the Oasis Center, and I've been there. I've been to his meetings, and I remember my teacher going to one of his meetings, and one of my friends asked him, like, oh, what did you think of it? And he just closed his eyes and he said, yeah, it's good, but no tools. And that was like one of the most impactful things for my teacher to say about this other like spiritual teacher in the city. That's like, yeah, you're going in, you're receiving something. There's a transmission, like you're there with everybody, but he's not giving you tools. He's not giving you something to help you fix what's going on in your life. He's the tool, and he's basically convincing you that in order for you to fix your problems, he's the only one. And that's not at all what you want to go for. And that's what's so powerful about the Hatha Yoga practice, is that it gives you tools. It's giving you everything. It's giving you the asana practice. It's giving you the pranayama practice, pratyahara, the satkarmas, all the kriyas and the cleansing techniques. It's giving you everything you need to do these things on your own, and with the synchronicity of finding a really good teacher and a guru who's going to guide you through these. Because even though you can pick up the Hatha Yoga Pradipika and you have everything in there that you need to know, going through it by yourself is going to be really tough. You're going to get to a point where the demand on your body and the demand on your mind is so high that you need guidance. And it's really no difference if you are training for an Olympic sport or something, right? Say even for like the NHL, professional hockey, the players are capable of playing, but they still have a coach. You know what I mean? They're not going onto the ice willy-nilly by themselves, skating around trying to make something happen. They are being trained by a coach. The coach is coming up with the plays. The coach is putting the team together. The coach is saying, okay, these are my forwards, these are my defense, and these are my lines. I'm going to have these 3 on the first line for the forwards. I'm going to have these 2 for the first line on defense. And I'm going to break up my team into 4 different lines, and I'm going to cycle through them. That's not controlled by the players. The players are just there to play the game, right? So as a Hatha Yoga practitioner, starting as a practitioner, you're just the player. You need the coach. You need the one that's going to say, hey, okay, I know there's 80 different traditional asanas that then breaks down into 2,000 postures. Yeah, you're going to do these ones because your guru is going to see something about you that you don't see about yourself. So your guru is going to say, okay, I want you to do these 4 asanas every day for an hour a day. So you're just literally doing four asanas, 15 minutes at a time. And I want you to do these 2 breathing techniques. And I want you to do this 1 cleansing technique. So say if it's a seated twist, say if it's like pigeon pose, say if it's butterfly pose, say if it's one more here, say if it's like cat cow, right? That yeah, you do those for 15 minutes for each one. Then you have 2 breathing techniques. Say if it's Kapalabhati breath and Anuloma Viloma. Then you do 1 cleansing kriya just for now. Maybe it's neti, right? You do the neti pot and you're just cleaning out your nostrils. And then that as a package for you then to do and get used to. So then over time, your teacher goes, okay, you've got those down. That's good. You cleaned out some things because of those. Now here's a next batch. Now here's a next batch. Now here's, so that's the benefit of having a really good guru who's going to look at you and be able to formulate what you need until you're ready to look at all this stuff. And your guru goes, okay, I don't need to tell you what practices to do. You can create your own practices. But when it comes to meditation, this is what we're going to do for meditation. And this is what we're going to do together to enter into more subtle realms. And that's where then it gets into like astral projection and astral travel and exploring astral worlds where your guru is there with you. You know, there's ways for your guru to show up kind of spontaneously. Like for me, it's in my dreams. Like when Vishnuji shows up in my dreams, that is a very auspicious moment. That's telling me that I'm doing something right. You know, just the other night, I had a dream with my girlfriend Carly and my good friend Ian and Vishnuji. So like it started with Carly and we're doing music stuff. Then Vishnuji showed up, and as soon as that happened in the dream, I'm like, oh yeah, here we go, this is it. And he was just like showing me music stuff, and he was like, yeah, show me this, show me that. And then, you know, as he was leaving, he's like, yeah, we'll do more music stuff together. And then Ian came in and he was like, yeah, let's do some healing. I have this like new healing table, and like brought me onto this like table to do this like healing thing. And I woke up. And so when I look at that, I'm like, oh, okay, Vishnuji showed up. And he showed up when there was like communication from my friend Ian that he's like, hey, I'm in town, I want to see you. And, you know, and then with my girlfriend Carly and all the music stuff that we do together, and how it's like, it's all merging in, that there's these energies in my life that are starting to coalesce, and Vishnuji showing up and being like, all right, now's the time for me to energetically come back. Cause I haven't had a dream with him for a very long time. So to me, those are those levels of teaching through kind of like Hatha Yoga that are a little bit deeper. So I'm going to tell you a story. This is the story of Adinath, the first yogi who is Shiva, and his wife Parvati. And this is the beginning of Hatha Yoga. And this is perfect. This is how I'll end the episode. Shiva was developing Hatha Yoga and needed someone to teach it to. And at the time, Parvati was like, okay, yeah, you can teach it to me. And so Shiva, Adinath, starts to expound the teachings of Hatha Yoga. You know, he's saying Ha and Ta. Ha means sun, Ta means moon. Hatha Yoga is the unification of the sun and moon and these polar energies within us, the masculine, the feminine, and it relates to the nadis, the Ida and Pingala nadis and the Sushumna, and how these two dynamic forces rise up through Sushumna nadi, and it's the arousal of Kundalini, and it's how Shiva, as this point in our third eye, can then be awakened when Shakti rises back up through the chakras and through the Ida and Pingala and through Sushumna. And this whole time, he's expounding all of this like great knowledge to Parvati, and she's just bored. She's just bored as fuck. She just does not care, right? And Shiva's like, oh, like, how am I going to find a student that is going to take this on? And they hear from the river that they're beside this voice. And this voice is kind of muffled. It sounds like it's under the water or something. And it's saying like, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll learn from you. And out of the river comes a fish. And the giant fish opens its mouth. And this man comes out and says, great Shiva, great Adinath, I will take on Hatha Yoga. I will teach. And so this is the first disciple of Adinath, Matsyendranath, the Lord of the fish, right? There's a pose, there's two poses, Matsyendrasana and Matsyasana. So Matsyasana, I believe, is the twist, the seated twist, and Matsyendrasana is the fish pose where you're on your back and you arch your back and you come up onto your forearms and you place the top of your head on the ground. You stretch through your neck. And so these are like the two poses that Matsyendrasana perfected. So like those are his asanas, right? And so this is the start of Hatha Yoga as like kind of like a mythological story, right? But as you heard in, as I was reading in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, Matsyendrasana was a real person, right? Like he was an actual figure and wrote a lot of stuff. And then Gorokshanath is the second student. So Gorokshanath is the student of Matsyendranath, or is it the other way around? I'm kind of forgetting right now. And so it's important to have these kind of like mythological stories as ways to pass down the teachings. And I think, and that's how they were used thousands of years ago. This is a part of the oral tradition, right? So especially when you're teaching kids, a story about a fish coming out of the river and opening its mouth and a man jumping out of it is pretty exciting. If I'm like a 5-year-old kid, you know, my imagination is going to run wild of thinking about this like giant fish who swallowed a man and nobody knew until, you know, Shiva was talking about yoga and this man is like, I gotta get out of here. and so I think that's where the intention comes from. And I know that's how the Upanishads were too. And even the design of the asanas as well. If you look at the names, even the Sanskrit names, tree pose, cow face muzzle pose, like tiger pose, peacock pose. Everything's about animals and plants. And the reason for that is because way, way, way back in the day, when the practices were based on an oral tradition, and when there was kind of animosity around the sadhus, that their students were kids, right? They would take on disciples from families whose there would always be one kid that didn't want to do anything. And this was the sign of the ascetic. In a family of farmers, you have one kid that really wants to work in the farm and really wants to help the dad. There were one kid that wants to go to university and go to school and be a scholar. There's one kid that wants to join the military and be a warrior. And then there's one kid that's like, I don't care. I don't want to do any of that. I just want to sit alone and be quiet and close my eyes and look at nature. And so the rishis and the sadhus, who were Brahmins that left the Vedic order, they would go to towns and villages and they would look for these children, and they would ask, hey, this one boy of yours is showing signs of austerity, that he's actually more suited for an ascetic life. Can we bring him to our yoga school? And it's not like they kidnap these kids. They would have permission, right? And the parents would be like, yeah, of course. Like, that was an honorable thing when they would have these like Brahmins come and be like, hey, we're seeing signs of a spiritual life for your kid. Can we take him to our school? They would say, yeah, for sure. And, the boy would be able to come back whenever. And this is exactly what happened to my teacher, Vishnuji, that he was nonverbal until I think he was around 4 or 5. And when he started speaking, he wanted to immediately go and do yoga. So when he was 6 years old, he tried to run away to join his uncle's gurukul, which is like a yoga school out in the jungle. And so he tried to take a train and run away. But then he was found and brought back, and the age to start is 8 years old. So he had to wait a couple more years. And then as soon as he turned 8, he immediately went to the Gurukul, and he spent his entire childhood and into his adulthood there. And that's fairly typical in that tradition, right? And so these sadhus and these gurus would go to villages and find these kids who wanted and were given permission to go and become yogis. And so, and when you're teaching kids, you're not teaching them from a scholarly place. You're not trying to teach them the very technical terms for things. You're gonna try to teach them in a fun way. You're gonna teach them tree pose. You're gonna teach them frog pose, lizard pose. You're gonna teach them, hey, look, there's this thing out in nature that looks this way, peacock pose or flamingo pose. We're going to try to emulate those animals and those plants by putting our bodies into positions. And then it's a way of kind of tricking the brain and tricking them into doing something that is actually really beneficial for them, strengthening their bodies, increasing flexibility, increasing endurance to be able to sit in full lotus for a long period of time. And so you have the start of these practices rooted in teaching children. And fast forward to now, you still have that. You still see that. Tree pose is still tree pose. Eagle pose is still eagle pose. But what I love is that my teacher, Vishnuji, has created an encyclopedia that has turned it more sophisticated and more scientific, where the terms are very precise. So, for example, in my teacher's Yogasana, the Encyclopedia of Yoga Postures, he'll still have these like traditional names where it's what we're used to, right? Like downward dog, or, horse pose, or warrior pose, or whatever. But then he's added these variations where in the name of the variation, he then turns it very precise, where he's still using the traditional name and using the same Sanskrit, but then he's identifying exactly what you're doing in the variation. So for example, in downward dog, he clarifies that downward dog and what we know as downward dog are actually two different things. So what we know of as downward dog, where we have our feet on the ground and we're kind of in this like mountain triangle shape, that if our torso is straight, that we're not arching our back, and that we're not pressing our chest forward, and we're just more in a stable position, that is called mountain pose. So he calls that Parvatasana. But where it gets a little bit more technical is, say if you are in Parvatasana and you, with your right hand, reach for your right ankle. He calls that Parvatasana Ekahasa Pada Bada. So mountain pose, holding one ankle. So he's still calling it mountain pose, but then if you're going to reach back with your right hand and take a hold of your ankle, that you're using Sanskrit to identify that exactly, right? By calling it Parvatasana Eka Hasta Pada Bada. So Eka Hasta Pada Bada, holding one ankle. And he has over 800 postures in his book. It's really amazing. I love going through it. Right? And then in this section, so it's on page 94. It's on page 94, where he's showing Parvatasana. And then on page 97, he's showing downward dog. And it looks different. It's very much with an arched back. He's pressing his chest forward. And he's calling it Adho Mukha Svanasana, right? Downward facing dog. And it goes on and on. He has, 3 to 4 different variations for each posture. And it's an incredible book. It took him like 5 years to make it, Yeah, so I just opened up a page exactly to Matsyasana. So Matsyasana is the fish pose that you're laying on your back. And Matsyendrasana is the seated twist one. So I think I reversed that earlier when I was talking about it. Right? So for example, Matsyasana with variations. So he can call it Matsyasana Kasitsya Pada, fish pose, legs towards the horizon. That's where you're lifting your legs up and you're hovering them off the ground. Yeah, interesting stuff. Super interesting stuff. What else? What else can I go into? 11 minutes past my 1 hour mark. So I think I'll cap it there. A lot to think about, a lot to digest. What I would encourage you to do is look through the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. It's free online. You can find the PDF just online. I'll actually have a link to it in the description of this episode. Otherwise, I would recommend just ordering it from the Bihar School of Yoga. It's worth to have a copy of it. To me, I find it so much more satisfying to have a physical copy to read from and not have to rely on looking at a screen. I mean, I'm sure we all do all day, every day. The internet and social media is super addictive. But yeah, I hope that was a good introduction to Hatha Yoga, give some context to the history of it, some issues around its conceptualization and what's the important parts of it. And I'll go much deeper into it in the next episode of specific practices, going through the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, really kind of explore again the asana part of it, the pranayama part of it, the energetic and meditation part of it, and then kind of finish off with where we're at now with the yoga practice and kind of like what my forecast of it is of it, like kind of going into the future. That even though we've seen a kind of watered down version of it over the years because of commercialization, and because of treating it as just a name and just a label for a style, that it's so much more about initiating a complete lifestyle than it is just a name on a schedule. So that's it for today. Thank you for listening. Check out the links in my description to my social media. I've taken down my website for the time being. I'm just like paying for nothing kind of. So I was like, it was mainly for my music stuff, but I don't really need it up right now. So I would say the best thing to do is follow me on Instagram, send me messages on there, Yogi Zorananda, and some exciting things. I'm in a new band. We're preparing for one of our biggest shows, our second show in the city here at a venue that is like pretty prolific in the music scene, and called the Starlight Room. So we're really looking forward to preparing for that and doing our show. And we have a music video that's going to be coming out soon. We have a new song coming out right away. Yeah, lots of good things happening. And, when it comes to being a yogi and doing yoga, it's about putting that energy into that stuff. It's putting energy into life. It's doing the practice and doing the work so that you can show up in life energized. You can show up in life ready to go, to put it towards your music, your work, your school, your family, like whatever it is, that it's an addition into your life, and that it has increased your capacity to be able to give into those things that are really important to you. So thank you for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy.